The Seeds of Conflict and the Rise of Caesar. Opening scene, the turning point at Pharsalus. Under a blazing August sun in 48 BCE, the dust-choked plains of Pharsalus bore witness to one of the most pivotal battles in Roman history. Two armies stood poised to decide the fate of a republic on the brink of transformation. On one side, Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, Pompey the Great, commanded the remnants of the Optimates, champions of the senatorial elite. Opposing him was Gaius Julius Caesar, his former ally turned archrival, a man whose ambition knew no bounds. The clash was inevitable, yet its conclusion sent shockwaves through the ancient world. Caesar's forces, outnumbered and seemingly disadvantaged, executed a masterstroke of strategy. Pompey's cavalry, the key to his plan, was routed by Caesar's disciplined reserves. As panic spread through Pompey's ranks, Caesar's legions advanced with ruthless precision. The great general Pompey fled the battlefield, leaving behind an army in shambles. But the war was far from over, the preludes to civil war. To understand this turning point, one must journey back years before Pharsalus. The Roman Republic of the late 1st century BCE was a fragile construct, plagued by corruption, inequality, and relentless power struggles. The First Triumvirate, a political alliance between Caesar, Pompey, and Marcus Licinius Crassus, was forged in 60 BCE to dominate Roman politics. However, it was a pact destined to fracture. Crassus' death in 53 BCE, during his ill-fated campaign against the Parthians, left Caesar and Pompey in an uneasy duopoly. Pompey, once Caesar's ally, grew increasingly wary of his partner's rising power and popularity. Caesar's conquests in Gaul had transformed him from a debt-ridden politician into a war hero commanding legions fiercely loyal to him alone. The Senate, led by staunch conservatives, saw Caesar as a threat to the Republic's survival. The crisis escalated when the Senate, under Pompey's influence, demanded that Caesar disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. Defying the decree, Caesar famously crossed the Rubicon River in 49 BCE with his legion, declaring, "The die is cast." Civil war was now unavoidable, a clash of titans. Caesar's march on Rome was as much psychological warfare as a military campaign. His rapid advance forced Pompey and the Senate to flee to Greece, where they regrouped. Caesar, with his characteristic boldness, seized Rome without bloodshed and secured vital resources. Yet, he understood that the war would only end with Pompey's defeat. Pompey's strategy relied on leveraging his naval superiority and the resources of the eastern provinces. His army, though initially larger, was composed of hastily recruited soldiers. Caesar's forces, on the other hand, were battle-hardened veterans, utterly devoted to their commander. In early 48 BCE, Caesar's army crossed the Adriatic Sea, initiating a cat-and-mouse campaign in the hills and plains of Greece. Pompey's forces sought to wear Caesar down through attrition, but Caesar countered with audacious maneuvers. His ability to outthink and outmaneuver his opponents frustrated Pompey, who eventually chose to face Caesar in open battle at Pharsalus. The Battle of Pharsalus. Strategy and tactics. The morning of the battle saw Caesar's 22,000 men outnumbered nearly 2-to-1 by Pompey's 45,000. Yet, Caesar's genius lay in exploiting his opponent's weaknesses. Pompey's plan hinged on his superior cavalry overwhelming Caesar's right flank. Anticipating this, Caesar positioned a concealed reserve of 3,000 veteran infantry to counterattack. When Pompey's cavalry charged, Caesar's reserves emerged, striking with devastating effect. The cavalry fled, exposing Pompey's infantry to a flank assault. The chaos rippled through the ranks, and Pompey's army crumbled. Caesar's forces advanced relentlessly, securing a decisive victory. The day ended with thousands of Pompeian soldiers dead or captured, and the Optimates' cause gravely weakened. Pompey's flight and assassination. Following his defeat, Pompey fled to Egypt, seeking refuge with the young pharaoh Ptolemy XIII. However, political intrigue awaited him. Ptolemy's advisors, hoping to curry favor with Caesar, betrayed Pompey. On the shores of Alexandria, he was murdered, his severed head presented to Caesar upon his arrival. Historical accounts diverge on Caesar's reaction. Plutarch describes genuine grief, portraying Caesar as mourning the loss of a former ally. Cassius Dio, however, suggests that Caesar's sorrow was performative, a calculated move to project magnanimity. Whatever the truth, Pompey's death marked a turning point. He became a martyr for the Optimates, intensifying resistance against Caesar. Caesar's consolidation of power. Back in Rome, Caesar's position was far from secure. He had to manage a fractious Senate, appease the masses, and prepare for campaigns against remaining Pompeian forces. His clemency toward defeated enemies, though politically astute, also bred resentment. Meanwhile, unrest simmered across the provinces, from Spain to Asia Minor. To bolster his position, Caesar implemented sweeping reforms. He reorganized the calendar, addressed Rome's debt crisis, and expanded citizenship to loyal provinces. Yet, these measures were as much about consolidating power as improving governance. The seeds of dictatorship were sown, even as Caesar professed loyalty to republican ideals. The road to destiny. The first act of Caesar's civil war set the stage for his eventual dominance over Rome. The triumph at Pharsalus showcased his military brilliance and capacity for decisive action. Yet, it also underscored the fragility of the Republic and the lengths to which its champions would go to preserve or dismantle it. As Caesar pursued his enemies across the Mediterranean, the question loomed: could one man's vision reshape Rome, or would the Republic's legacy ultimately destroy him? This is a story of ambition, betrayal, and transformation, one that would echo through history as the dawn of the Roman Empire. Caesar in Egypt, politics, betrayal, and the siege of Alexandria. Opening scene: arrival in Alexandria. The year was 48 BCE, and Julius Caesar had just triumphed at Pharsalus. But his pursuit of Pompey brought him to the sun-soaked shores of Egypt, a kingdom simmering with internal strife and brimming with political intrigue. Caesar's fleet arrived at Alexandria under the guise of diplomacy, but he was met with grim tidings. Pompey the Great, his once loyal ally and recent enemy, had been assassinated by agents of Ptolemy XIII. The young pharaoh, advised by the cunning eunuch Pothinus and General Achilles, sought to curry favor with Caesar by presenting him with Pompey's severed head. The gesture, however, backfired spectacularly. Caesar turned away in disgust, reportedly shedding tears over the loss of his rival. Whether his grief was genuine or a calculated political display remains a matter of historical debate. Yet, it is clear that Caesar recognized the miscalculation. Pompey's death had turned him into a martyr for the Optimates, complicating Caesar's efforts to consolidate power. Cleopatra's dramatic entrance. Amidst the chaos of Egypt's dynastic quarrels, Cleopatra VII, the exiled co-ruler, seized the opportunity to align herself with Caesar. According to legend, she smuggled herself into Alexandria hidden in a rolled carpet or a bed sack, depending on the source, to meet Caesar in person. This bold act of theatrical diplomacy captivated the Roman general, not just with its ingenuity but also with Cleopatra's charm and intelligence. Cleopatra's alliance with Caesar was as much a political gambit as it was a personal one. She sought his support to reclaim her throne from her younger brother Ptolemy XIII. Caesar, ever the opportunist, saw the potential in backing Cleopatra. By supporting her claim, he could stabilize Egypt under a pro-Roman regime and secure the repayment of the kingdom's massive debts to Rome. The siege begins, a kingdom divided. Ptolemy's advisors, led by Pothinus, saw Caesar's presence as a direct threat to their control. Hostilities erupted as Achilles mustered a formidable Egyptian army to confront Caesar. Despite his limited numbers, only about 4,000 men, Caesar took swift action. He fortified his position within the royal quarter of Alexandria, using the city's labyrinthine streets to his advantage. Achilles, commanding an army of 20,000 infantry and 2,000 cavalry, sought to overwhelm Caesar's forces through sheer numbers. The Egyptians also exploited their naval superiority, threatening to cut off Caesar's supply lines. In response, Caesar launched a daring operation to seize the Great Harbor, destroying much of the Egyptian fleet in a blaze that inadvertently damaged the Library of Alexandria. While the extent of the library's destruction remains debated, the symbolic loss of knowledge added a layer of tragedy to the conflict. Political maneuvering and internal betrayals. As the siege dragged on, intrigue and betrayal defined the Egyptian court. Cleopatra's younger sister, Arsinoe IV, defected to the Egyptian army and conspired against both Caesar and her sibling. She replaced Achilles with her loyalist, Ganymedes, whose engineering prowess posed new challenges for Caesar. Ganymedes polluted Caesar's water supply by flooding it with seawater, forcing his troops to dig wells to access fresh water. Meanwhile, Caesar acted decisively to neutralize internal threats. He had Pothinus executed after uncovering his plot to assassinate him. Arsinoe's machinations, however, prolonged the stalemate. The situation was precarious. Caesar's forces were outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and confined within a hostile city. A daring rescue, reinforcements arrive. Salvation came in the form of Mithridates of Pergamum, a loyal ally who rallied a relief force of 13,000 men and marched through Syria to Egypt. This army's arrival at the Nile Delta forced Ptolemy XIII to divide his forces. Seizing the moment, Caesar coordinated a two-pronged assault. While Mithridates attacked from the north, Caesar launched a bold offensive, crossing the Nile to confront Ptolemy directly. The Battle of the Nile was fierce and decisive. Caesar's legions, seasoned and disciplined, outmatched the Egyptian forces. Ptolemy XII's army crumbled under the Roman onslaught, and the young pharaoh himself drowned in the Nile while attempting to flee. With his death, Cleopatra's claim to the throne was secure. Aftermath and the Cleopatra-Caesar alliance. In the wake of victory, Caesar installed Cleopatra as co-ruler alongside her younger brother, Ptolemy XIV, to placate Egyptian tradition. Their alliance deepened, both politically and personally. Cleopatra bore Caesar a son, Ptolemy XV, later known as Caesarion, solidifying her position as Rome's most influential ally in the East. The 9 months Caesar spent in Egypt, however, came at a cost. While he was engaged in Alexandria, unrest brewed across the Roman provinces. Mark Antony's mismanagement in Rome, uprisings in Spain, and the resurgence of Pompeian forces in North Africa all demanded Caesar's attention. Critics in Rome viewed his extended stay in Egypt as indulgent, yet Caesar's time with Cleopatra laid the foundation for a crucial alliance that would shape the future of both Rome and Egypt. Caesar's tactical genius and political acumen. Caesar's Egyptian campaign showcases his unparalleled ability to adapt to complex situations. His mastery of urban warfare, combined with his diplomatic finesse, allowed him to turn a dire predicament into a strategic victory. By aligning with Cleopatra, Caesar not only secured Egypt as a valuable ally but also ensured a steady flow of resources to fund his broader campaigns. Yet, this episode also highlights Caesar's vulnerabilities. His over-reliance on swift, decisive actions sometimes led to avoidable risks. The siege of Alexandria stretched his forces thin and nearly cost him his life. Moreover, his entanglement with Cleopatra fueled political propaganda among his enemies, who painted him as a ruler seduced by foreign luxury. The costs and rewards of ambition. Caesar's time in Egypt was a microcosm of his leadership style, bold, strategic, and unyielding. It was a chapter defined by both triumph and controversy, as Caesar navigated the treacherous waters of Egyptian politics while maintaining his vision for Rome. As he departed Alexandria to address crises elsewhere, the question lingered: could Caesar maintain his momentum, or would his enemies exploit the cracks in his armor? This chapter of Caesar's life underscores the duality of his character. A man of extraordinary vision and capability, yet one whose ambition often brought as many challenges as it did rewards. It is a story of resilience, risk, and the relentless pursuit of power. A story that continues to captivate the imagination of historians and audiences alike. The wider civil war challenges across the empire. Opening scene: a fractured empire. The year was 47 BCE. Julius Caesar, fresh from his triumphs in Egypt, now faced a world embroiled in chaos. His prolonged absence from Rome had emboldened his enemies and destabilized his fragile control over the Republic. Pompey's sons, the remnants of the Optimates, had begun consolidating forces in North Africa and Spain, while unrest brewed across other provinces. The Republic, already fragile, teetered on the edge of collapse. Yet Caesar was undeterred. With characteristic resolve, he set out to reclaim control, secure his territories, and extinguish the last embers of opposition. This phase of the civil war would push him to his limits, testing both his strategic genius and his political acumen. Antony's governance in Rome, a misstep in leadership. While Caesar fought in Egypt, Mark Antony had been left to govern Rome. Though a skilled soldier, Antony lacked the finesse needed to navigate the city's complex political landscape. His decision to delay debt cancellations, a policy Caesar had promised, sparked unrest among both senators and plebeians. Discontent rippled through the city, culminating in violent riots that Antony struggled to suppress. Caesar's political enemies seized this opportunity to undermine his authority. Senators who had once fled Rome returned to stir opposition, and whispers of Caesar's supposed decadence in Egypt spread like wildfire. The seeds of dissent were being sown, even as Caesar prepared to return. The Eastern Front, Pharnaces II, and the Battle of Zela. As if unrest in Rome wasn't enough, Caesar also faced threats in Asia Minor. Pharnaces II, son of the infamous Mithridates VI, had taken advantage of the civil war to reclaim his father's former territories in Pontus. Pharnaces, emboldened by a recent victory against a Roman force under Gnaeus Domitius Calvinus, posed a significant challenge. Caesar's response was swift. Leading his legions with characteristic urgency, he arrived in Pontus and confronted Pharnaces at Zela. The battle that ensued was a masterclass in tactical efficiency. Pharnaces, confident after his earlier victories, underestimated Caesar's speed and decisiveness. Caesar's legions attacked with relentless precision, routing Pharnaces' forces in a single day. It was after this victory that Caesar reportedly uttered the famous words, "Veni, Vidi, Vici, I came, I saw, I conquered." This succinct declaration encapsulated not just the campaign but Caesar's entire approach to warfare. Direct, swift, and overwhelmingly effective. The resurgence of the Pompeian faction in North Africa. Even as Caesar triumphed in the east, the Pompeian faction regrouped in North Africa. Led by Metellus Scipio and supported by King Juba I of Numidia, the Optimates had amassed a formidable force. This army included veteran Roman soldiers who had escaped earlier defeats, as well as Numidian cavalry and war elephants. The Optimate strategy was clear: consolidate their position in Africa, rally support from local allies, and prepare for an eventual invasion of Italy. They were banking on Caesar being overstretched, unable to muster the resources for yet another campaign. Caesar's return to Rome, a calculated display of authority. Before launching his African campaign, Caesar returned to Rome to address the unrest. His arrival was a spectacle. Accompanied by his loyal veterans, Caesar projected strength and control. He addressed the Senate, granting clemency to those who had opposed him, while simultaneously warning against further dissent. One of his most brilliant moves was the handling of the mutinous legions stationed in Campania. These soldiers, who had served tirelessly for over a decade, demanded the rewards they were promised after Pharsalus. When their demands escalated into threats, Caesar met them head-on. He feigned indifference, dismissing them as citizens rather than soldiers, and prepared to disband them. This psychological gambit worked. Shamed and desperate to regain his favor, the soldiers begged to rejoin his ranks. Caesar's mastery of manipulation was on full display. Preparations for the African campaign. With Rome pacified, Caesar turned his attention to North Africa. Gathering an army of 10 legions, he planned an audacious assault on the Optimate stronghold. However, logistical challenges loomed large. The veteran legions were weary, and resources were stretched thin. To fund the campaign, Caesar borrowed heavily from Rome's wealthiest citizens, further straining his popularity among the elite. Despite these obstacles, Caesar's charisma and strategic brilliance kept his forces united. His ability to inspire loyalty in his troops was unparalleled, a testament to his leadership. A clash of titans. The African campaign begins. Caesar landed in Africa in late 47 BCE, immediately facing challenges. The Optimates, well entrenched and bolstered by Juba's forces, had the upper hand. Initial skirmishes tested Caesar's resolve and forced him to adapt his tactics. The use of Numidian cavalry by the enemy posed a significant threat, as did the psychological impact of the war elephants. Caesar, however, was undeterred. He reorganized his forces, incorporating innovative strategies to counter the elephants and leveraging his veterans' discipline to hold the line against overwhelming odds. Each battle brought Caesar closer to the decisive confrontation he sought. Caesar's strategic brilliance and political savvy. Caesar's campaigns during this period highlight the duality of his leadership. On the battlefield, he was a master tactician, capable of turning dire situations into triumphs. Off the battlefield, his political acumen allowed him to navigate the treacherous waters of Roman politics, securing his position despite mounting challenges. However, these victories came at a cost. The strain on Rome's economy, the growing resentment among the Senate, and the constant threat of rebellion revealed the cracks in Caesar's grand vision. His relentless ambition, while driving his success, also sowed the seeds of future conflict. The stage is set for the final act. As Caesar pushed forward in Africa, the stakes grew higher. The Optimates were cornered but not defeated, and whispers of dissent in Rome threatened to undermine his gains. Yet, Caesar remained unwavering, a man driven by destiny. This chapter of the Civil War underscores the complexity of Caesar's character. A brilliant leader whose ambition reshaped the Roman world, but whose methods left a legacy of both admiration and animosity. The story of his African campaign would set the stage for the final confrontation with the Optimates, a battle that would determine the fate of the Republic and the future of Rome. The African campaign and Caesar's path to dictatorship. Opening scene, the descent into Africa. December 47 BCE. A turbulent sea battered Julius Caesar's fleet as he approached the shores of North Africa. The stakes were monumental. Caesar's arrival marked the beginning of his final showdown with the remnants of the Pompeian faction. As his ships crested the waves, Caesar knew the campaign ahead would determine the fate of Rome itself. This was no ordinary war. It was the culmination of a decade of conflict, ambition, and betrayal. The Optimates, led by Metellus Scipio and supported by King Juba I of Numidia, had entrenched themselves in the region. Their coalition boasted a massive army, bolstered by Numidian cavalry and the imposing presence of war elephants. Caesar, with only a fraction of his forces initially, faced overwhelming odds. Yet, as he had demonstrated countless times before, Caesar thrived in adversity. Landing at Hadramedum, a rocky start. Caesar's initial landing near Hadramedum, modern-day Sousse, Tunisia, was fraught with difficulty. His forces, scattered by storms, numbered only about 3,000 infantry and 150 cavalry, a precarious position given the proximity of the enemy's stronghold. Attempting to negotiate with the city's garrison proved futile, as the messenger was killed and the city's gates remained closed. Realizing the need to avoid a direct confrontation, Caesar moved his troops further along the coast to regroup. The Optimates seized the opportunity to strike, harassing Caesar's forces with Numidian cavalry. However, Caesar's disciplined veterans held their ground, executing a fighting retreat to the nearby town of Ruspina. Here, Caesar established a defensive position, consolidating his scattered forces and preparing for the battles to come. A war of attrition, the struggle for supplies. The early days of the African campaign were defined by a war of attrition. The Optimates, leveraging their superior cavalry, sought to isolate Caesar by cutting off his supply lines. Food was scarce, and Caesar's forces were forced to forage in hostile territory, often skirmishing with enemy patrols. To secure provisions, Caesar negotiated with local towns, promising protection in exchange for supplies. Despite these challenges, Caesar's strategic ingenuity shone through. He fortified Ruspina, creating a network of defenses that secured his access to the sea and allowed for the arrival of reinforcements. When additional troops from Sicily finally joined him, Caesar's army swelled to 15,000 infantry and several hundred cavalry, though still outnumbered by the Optimates. The Battle of Ruspina, Caesar's prowess tested. The Battle of Ruspina in January 46 BCE was one of Caesar's most perilous engagements. Facing a massive force of Numidian cavalry and light infantry under the command of Labienus and Petreius, Caesar's troops were surrounded and bombarded with missiles. His infantry, trained for close combat, struggled to adapt to the skirmishing tactics of their enemy. In a daring maneuver, Caesar reorganized his lines mid-battle. He ordered every other cohort to face outward, creating a dual-fronted formation that allowed his men to repel attacks from multiple directions. The discipline of Caesar's veterans proved decisive. Though heavily outnumbered, they maintained cohesion and eventually forced the Numidians to retreat. This battle highlighted Caesar's resilience and adaptability. However, it also underscored the challenges he faced in Africa, where terrain and enemy tactics often negated the traditional advantages of Roman heavy infantry. The turning point, Caesar gains the initiative. As winter turned to spring, Caesar's situation began to improve. Reinforcements continued to arrive, and local towns increasingly sided with him, swayed by his promises of clemency and protection. Meanwhile, internal divisions plagued the Optimates. King Juba was forced to withdraw some of his forces to deal with a Mauritanian invasion, weakening the coalition. Caesar capitalized on these developments by launching a series of bold offensives. He captured key towns, disrupted enemy supply lines, and forced the Optimates into a defensive posture. His use of light infantry and cavalry, drawn from allied contingents, proved particularly effective in countering Numidian tactics. The decisive Battle of Thapsus. The campaign's climax came in April 46 BCE near Thapsus, where Caesar faced the combined forces of Scipio and Juba. The Optimates, numbering over 50,000, occupied a strong defensive position fortified by war elephants. Caesar's army, though smaller, was battle-hardened and led by one of history's greatest tacticians. Before the battle, Caesar rallied his troops with a rousing speech, emphasizing the stakes of their fight. He knew that victory here would crush the Pompeian cause and secure his dominance over Rome. The battle began with a coordinated assault on the Optimates' flanks. Caesar's archers and slingers targeted the war elephants, sowing chaos in the enemy ranks. When the elephants panicked and turned on their own lines, Caesar seized the moment, ordering a full-scale attack. His legions broke through the enemy's defenses, routing Scipio's forces. The aftermath was brutal. Thousands of Optimates were killed, and Scipio himself committed suicide rather than face capture. Juba fled but was later defeated and took his own life. The Pompeian faction was effectively annihilated. Caesar's triumph and the aftermath. With North Africa secured, Caesar returned to Rome in a blaze of glory. His victory at Thapsus marked the end of organized resistance to his rule, allowing him to focus on consolidating power. He celebrated a lavish triumph, parading his successes before the Roman populace and further cementing his image as Rome's savior. However, the victory came at a cost. The brutal suppression of the Optimates alienated many of Caesar's former allies. His accumulation of power, now virtually unchecked, began to draw comparisons to monarchy, a concept deeply anathema to Roman republican ideals. Caesar's legacy and the price of ambition. The African campaign showcased Caesar's unmatched military genius and his ability to turn adversity into triumph. Yet, it also highlighted the contradictions of his character. While he professed loyalty to the Republic, his actions increasingly concentrated power in his hands. His clemency towards defeated enemies, though politically astute, often masked the ruthlessness with which he pursued his goals. Caesar's rise was both a testament to his extraordinary talents and a reflection of Rome's systemic weaknesses. The Republic's inability to manage its internal divisions created the conditions for Caesar's ascent, but his methods, though effective, left a legacy of autocracy that would culminate in his assassination just 2 years later. The road to empire. The African campaign was the final act in Caesar's civil war, a campaign that transformed him from a revolutionary general into the unchallenged master of Rome. It was a story of ambition and conflict, of triumph and tragedy. Caesar's victories reshaped the Roman world, but they also set the stage for the Republic's transformation into an empire. As Caesar stood at the pinnacle of power, the seeds of his downfall were already being sown. His story remains a cautionary tale of how ambition, even when coupled with genius, can both elevate and destroy. It is a narrative that continues to captivate and resonate, echoing through the corridors of history as one of Rome's most dramatic chapters.